You know those facts you've repeated your whole life with total confidence? The ones your parents told you, your teachers confirmed, and you've passed on to other people without a second thought? Yeah, most of them are complete garbage. Humanity has been passing around lies like a game of telephone that's been running for centuries, and nobody ever bothered to check the original message. Get comfortable because your entire belief system is about to get a reality check. 1. We're starting with the big one that's been ruining science education for generations. The myth that humans only use 10% of their brains. This lie has been repeated in movies, books, motivational speeches, and by that one uncle at every family dinner who swears he could move objects with his mind if he just unlocked the other 90%. It's been the premise of entire Hollywood blockbusters where characters gain superhuman abilities by accessing previously dormant brain regions. And it's the foundation of countless self-help programs that promise to help you unlock your full potential for 3 easy payments of $49.99. In reality, brain imaging technology has conclusively shown that virtually every region of the brain is active throughout the day. And even during deep sleep, significantly more than 10% of your brain is working to keep you breathing, dreaming, and alive. The myth likely started from a misquote of a neuroscience study in the early 1900s, and has been kept alive by science fiction writers and self-help gurus who desperately need you to believe you have untapped superpowers so they can sell you a book, a course, or a seminar about unlocking them. If you actually only used 10% of your brain, you wouldn't be able to stand up, form a sentence, or read this. You'd essentially be in a vegetative state, which is the opposite of the superhero narrative the myth is trying to sell. 2. Someone probably told you that goldfish have a 3-second memory, and you believed it because goldfish genuinely look like they have a 3-second memory. They swim into the same glass wall 400 times a day, seem perpetually startled by their own reflection, and give off the general aura of a creature that has absolutely no idea what happened 3 seconds ago or what's about to happen 3 seconds from now. The thing is, it's completely untrue. Scientists have conducted extensive experiments training goldfish to navigate complex mazes, respond to specific musical sounds, push levers for food at particular times of day, and remember feeding schedules for months, not seconds, not minutes, months. One study demonstrated that goldfish could remember a specific escape route in a maze for at least 5 months after learning it, which is a better memory than some humans have for where they parked their car this morning. The 3-second myth was likely invented by someone who felt guilty about keeping a living creature in a tiny glass bowl on their desk and needed a scientific-sounding excuse to feel less terrible about it. It's fine, he doesn't even remember being in here 3 seconds ago. Is a much more comfortable thought than this animal has been aware of its imprisonment for its entire life. 3. That gum you accidentally swallowed in 3rd grade? It didn't sit in your stomach for 7 years forming a slowly growing mass of synthetic rubber that's still lurking somewhere in your digestive system. This lie has terrified children for generations and convinced millions of adults that their bodies contain a graveyard of Hubba Bubba, Juicy Fruit, and Big League Chew from the 1990s that's still slowly dissolving next to their other organs like some kind of candy archaeological site. In reality, swallowed gum passes through your digestive system just like virtually everything else you eat. The gum base is indeed indigestible, meaning your body can't break it down into nutrients, but it doesn't stick to your stomach walls, accumulate over time, or form some kind of gum stalactite hanging from your intestinal ceiling. It moves through your system and exits your body within a few days, following the same route as corn kernels, seeds, and other things your stomach can't fully process, but has no trouble moving along. The 7-year myth was almost certainly invented by an exhausted parent who was tired of scraping gum off furniture and needed a threat terrifying enough to make their child stop chewing it. And it worked so well that it became global medical misinformation. 4. Cracking your knuckles does not cause arthritis, no matter how many times your mother, your grandmother, your elementary school teacher, and that coworker who winces dramatically every time you pop a joint have told you otherwise. This myth has been debunked by multiple peer-reviewed studies over several decades, including one legendary experiment conducted by a doctor who cracked the knuckles on one hand every single day for over 60 years while leaving the other hand completely uncracked, then compared both hands and found absolutely zero difference in arthritis rates, joint health, or hand function between the two. The popping sound that horrifies everyone around you is just gas bubbles, specifically nitrogen, collapsing in the synovial fluid between your joints, not your bones grinding together, not your cartilage deteriorating, and not your future mobility being slowly destroyed, one satisfying pop at a time. The myth persists exclusively because the sound is genuinely unpleasant to other people, and it causes arthritis is a far more effective guilt trip than the honest version, which is, that noise makes my skin crawl, and I need you to stop for my sake, not yours. 5. Here's one that shaped how millions of people eat, play, and parent. The lie that you need to wait 30 minutes after eating before swimming, or you'll get cramps so severe you could drown. This myth turned every childhood pool day into a post-lunch hostage situation where kids sat wrapped in towels on hot concrete, staring longingly at water they couldn't enter, while a parent monitored 30 minutes on their watch like it was a life-or-death medical countdown. Entire summer afternoons were structured around this arbitrary waiting period, and generations of children grew up believing that a peanut butter sandwich could turn a swimming pool into a death trap. There is absolutely zero scientific evidence that swimming after eating causes dangerous cramps or increases drowning risk in any statistically meaningful way. You might feel mildly uncomfortable doing intense competitive laps on a very full stomach, the same way you'd feel uncomfortable sprinting or doing burpees immediately after Thanksgiving dinner. But the idea that casual swimming after a regular meal poses any danger whatsoever was pure parental fiction, almost certainly designed to give exhausted adults 30 minutes of poolside peace after serving lunch to children who had been screaming in the water since breakfast. 6. Everyone thinks the Great Wall of China is visible from space, and almost nobody has bothered to check because it sounds like it absolutely should be true. It's the longest wall ever built by humans, stretching thousands of miles across an entire country, so surely astronauts orbiting overhead can pick it out, right? Wrong, and not even close. Multiple astronauts from multiple countries, including Chinese astronauts who had every patriotic reason to confirm the claim, have stated definitively that the Great Wall is not visible from low Earth orbit with the naked eye. The wall is spectacularly long, but only about 15 to 30 feet wide, which from orbital altitude makes it roughly as visible as a single road or a garden fence. Meaning if you could see the Great Wall from space, you could also see every highway, rural road, and decently sized path on the planet, which kind of eliminates the special factor entirely. This myth has been printed in textbooks, repeated in documentaries, and taught in classrooms for decades by teachers who have never once taken 30 seconds to Google whether the thing they're confidently teaching millions of students is actually verifiably true. 7. Bulls are not enraged by the color red. This lie has been repeated for so long and so confidently that seeing red has become a universal metaphor for anger. Red flag is everyone's favorite way to describe warning signs, and entire cartoon episodes have been built around bulls charging furiously at anything scarlet while ignoring everything else. In reality, cattle are partially colorblind. They see the world primarily in shades of blue, yellow, and gray, and cannot meaningfully distinguish red from green or brown. What actually triggers the bull in a bullfight is the movement of the cape, not its color. The matador's cape is large, it's being waved aggressively, and it's moving in a way that any bull would find provocative, regardless of whether the fabric was red, blue, green, or covered in a floral print. Matadors could wave a beige bedsheet and get the same furious charge. The red cape tradition exists because red effectively hides bloodstains during the fight, which is a significantly darker practical reason than bulls hate red, and probably explains why the true explanation rarely makes it into children's picture books about bullfighting. 8. The idea that lightning never strikes the same place twice has been comforting scared people during thunderstorms for centuries, while being completely, measurably, photographically, and dangerously false. Lightning strikes the same places not just twice but repeatedly, predictably, and frequently. The Empire State Building gets struck roughly 20 to 25 times per year. Communication towers, tall trees on exposed hilltops, and other elevated structures get hit over and over because lightning is attracted to the tallest point in any given area, regardless of whether it has visited before. Lightning doesn't have a memory, doesn't keep a scorecard, and doesn't operate on any principle of fairness or rotation. It follows the path of least electrical resistance to the ground, and if that path goes through the same tree, tower, or unlucky church steeple every single storm, lightning will take that path every single time without hesitation. This myth is particularly dangerous because people have genuinely used it to justify standing in or near places that have recently been struck, assuming they're now statistically safe, which is the exact opposite of how atmospheric electricity works, and a great way to become a cautionary tale about believing folk wisdom over physics. 9. Someone at some point told you that shaving makes your hair grow back thicker, darker, and faster, and you've probably repeated this to at least 5 people in your life with the quiet confidence of someone passing along established medical wisdom. Shaving has absolutely no effect whatsoever on the thickness, color, density, or growth rate of your hair. This has been confirmed by dermatological studies dating back to the 1920s. Over a century of scientific evidence that has failed to make even the slightest dent in the myth's popularity. What actually happens is simple. Unshaved hair has a natural tapered tip that feels soft and fine, while a freshly shaved hair has a blunt, flat edge that feels coarser and appears darker against your skin when it first emerges. It's not thicker, it's the same hair with a flat top instead of a pointed one, creating an illusion of thickness without any actual biological change. This myth has survived for over 100 years because the sensory evidence seems to confirm it every time. Stubble genuinely feels thicker and rougher than long hair. And apparently a century of dermatologists patiently explaining the difference between feels different and is different hasn't been enough to overcome what your fingertips are telling you. 10. The claim that we swallow 8 spiders a year in our sleep has terrorized insomniacs, arachnophobes, and anyone who sleeps with their mouth open since the 1990s. And it's one of the most successfully spread pieces of deliberate misinformation in internet history. The fact appears to have originated from a 1993 magazine column written by a columnist named Lisa Holst, who was specifically trying to demonstrate how easily people believe made-up statistics they read in print or online. Meaning the lie about spider swallowing was literally invented as a demonstration of human gullibility. And then humanity immediately and enthusiastically proved her point by believing it, sharing it, and repeating it for the next 3 decades as if it were verified science. In reality, the vibrations from a sleeping human's breathing, heartbeat, and occasional snoring would be detected by a spider's exquisitely sensitive leg hairs and interpreted as giant, dangerous predator signals, causing them to flee rather than approach. Spiders have absolutely zero reason to crawl into the warm, noisy, moist, carbon dioxide blasting cave that is a sleeping human's open mouth when there are infinitely safer places to be. The myth survives because it's horrifying enough to be unforgettable and personally impossible to disprove without installing a camera in your mouth while you sleep, which is the perfect combination for immortal misinformation. 11. Diamonds are not rare. This is perhaps the most profitable lie in the entire history of marketing, a deception that has generated hundreds of billions of dollars in global sales over the past century and is still going strong today despite being thoroughly, repeatedly, and publicly debunked by economists, geologists, and journalists. A single company gained monopoly control over the majority of the world's diamond supply in the early 20th century and created the illusion of scarcity by purchasing and stockpiling massive quantities of stones, then releasing them to the market in tiny, carefully controlled amounts while simultaneously running the most effective advertising campaigns in history. Before those campaigns, engagement rings commonly featured rubies, sapphires, emeralds, or whatever gemstone the couple preferred. Nobody specifically associated diamonds with romantic commitment until a marketing firm literally invented the association and spent decades burning it into public consciousness. The same company created the rule that an engagement ring should cost 2 months' salary. Not because that's a cultural tradition passed down through generations, but because an advertising copywriter made it up in the 1980s and the company repeated it in advertisements until society accepted it as established social custom. Diamonds are among the most common gemstones on Earth. Their resale value drops dramatically the moment you leave the jewelry store, and the entire concept of diamond engagement rings is a manufactured tradition younger than sliced bread. But pointing any of this out at a wedding will still get you uninvited from the reception and possibly the entire family. 12. Napoleon was not short. This might be the single most successful piece of character assassination in the history of political propaganda, because over 200 years after his death, Napoleon complex is still a widely used and universally understood psychological term for short men with oversized egos and aggressive behavior. In reality, Napoleon stood approximately 5 feet 7 inches tall, which was average or slightly above average height for a Frenchman of his era. He was taller than the average Frenchman of the early 1800s, and roughly the same height as the average American man at that time. The short Napoleon myth originated from 2 sources: British political cartoonists who deliberately depicted him as a tiny, ridiculous figure to mock and undermine France's most powerful and feared military leader, and a widely repeated confusion between French inches and English inches that made his recorded height of 5 feet 2 inches in French measurement appear shorter than it actually was when interpreted through the English system. British propagandists were so spectacularly effective at ridiculing Napoleon's height that they managed to embed a factual error into global common knowledge that has survived for over 2 centuries, outlasting the British Empire itself, and proving that sometimes the most powerful weapon in a war isn't an army. It's a really effective joke. 13. The 5-second rule, the universal belief that food dropped on the floor is safe to eat if you pick it up within 5 seconds, is a lie that every single human on Earth has invoked at least once to justify eating something they picked up off the ground while knowing, somewhere deep in the rational part of their brain, that bacteria do not operate on a 5-second countdown timer or respect human deadlines. Multiple peer-reviewed studies have demonstrated that bacteria can transfer to food in significantly less than 1 second of contact with a contaminated surface. In some experiments, transfer was essentially instantaneous, with bacteria colonizing dropped food within milliseconds of impact. The 5-second rule should really be called the 0-second rule, or more accurately, the I dropped this cookie on the floor, and I'm going to eat it anyway because it's a really good cookie, and I'm choosing deliciousness over microbiology rule. The speed of your reflexes has absolutely no impact on the speed of microbial colonization, but the 5-second rule survives and thrives in every household on the planet because the alternative, accepting that all dropped food is contaminated and should be thrown away, conflicts with humanity's deep, primal, and honestly understandable reluctance to waste a perfectly good snack just because it briefly touched a surface that might have germs on it. 14. Touching a baby bird will not cause its mother to reject it because of your human scent. This myth has caused generations of well-meaning people to leave helpless fallen baby birds on the ground to die instead of returning them to their nests, which is actually the correct and helpful thing to do. The overwhelming majority of bird species have extremely limited olfactory capabilities. Their sense of smell is either very poor or functionally irrelevant to their parenting behavior, and they absolutely cannot detect traces of human scent on their offspring. Mother birds don't abandon their babies because they smell like human hands, any more than human mothers abandon their babies because they smell like a hospital. Parental instinct is significantly stronger than scent sensitivity in virtually all bird species. Birds abandon nests for reasons related to persistent predator presence, repeated physical disturbance to the nest structure, or survival calculations that have nothing to do with sniffing their children for traces of human contact. This myth was almost certainly invented by parents who didn't want their curious children picking up random wildlife, a perfectly reasonable parenting objective achieved through completely fabricated bird science that has inadvertently caused countless baby birds to be left to die on the ground by people who thought they were being respectful. 15. Your blood is never blue. Despite what you were taught in elementary school biology, despite what your veins clearly appear to show through your skin, and despite what those colorful textbook diagrams with red arteries and blue veins have been telling you since childhood, deoxygenated blood is not blue. It's a darker shade of red. The reason your veins appear blue through your skin is a function of how light penetrates and interacts with tissue. Specifically, the way different wavelengths of light are absorbed and reflected by your skin at varying depths creates an optical effect that makes underlying veins appear blue or blue-green, even though the blood inside them is unambiguously, measurably red. This myth is so deeply persistent that it's still taught in some classrooms, using diagrams that color code arteries red and veins blue, reinforcing a visual system that's convenient for educational illustrations, but has absolutely no basis in biological reality. If you've ever had blood drawn from a vein, you may have noticed that the blood coming out was red. Not blue, not purple, just a slightly darker shade of red than arterial blood, which should have been sufficient evidence to debunk this myth on the spot. But somehow watching actual red blood exit an actual vein is still not enough to override what a diagram in a third-grade science book told you 25 years ago. 16. The myth that Viking warriors wore horned helmets into battle has been so thoroughly and permanently absorbed into popular culture that it's essentially impossible to picture a Viking without two dramatic horns curving upward from their headgear. Every Halloween costume, every cartoon, every museum gift shop helmet, and every cultural reference to Vikings includes the horns, making them as synonymous with Norse warriors as swords and longships. In reality, there is zero, literally zero archaeological evidence that Vikings ever wore horned helmets in combat or at any other time. Not a single horned helmet has been found in any Viking burial site, settlement, or archaeological dig in centuries of excavation across Scandinavia and beyond. The reasons are practical. Attaching large horns to a battle helmet would add unnecessary weight, create obvious grab points for enemies to seize your head, and deflect incoming blows downward toward your skull instead of away from it, essentially turning a piece of protective armor into a device that helps your opponent kill you more efficiently. The horned helmet image was popularized by 19th century romantic artists and opera costume designers, who thought it looked impressively dramatic, and it stuck permanently in public consciousness because it does look impressively dramatic, even though it would have gotten actual Viking warriors killed approximately 30 seconds into any real battle. 17. Einstein did not fail math. This myth has been comforting underperforming students and frustrating physics teachers in equal measure for decades, providing the reassuring narrative that even the greatest geniuses struggle in school, so maybe your D- in 9th grade algebra is actually the first step on the road to a Nobel Prize, rather than a sign that you should have studied harder. In reality, Einstein excelled at mathematics from a remarkably young age, and had mastered calculus before his 16th birthday, a level of mathematical proficiency that most adults never achieve in their entire lives. He did fail an entrance examination to a polytechnic school in Zurich, but his failures were in non-math subjects like French, botany, and zoology, not in the mathematical and physical sciences where he scored exceptionally high marks. The myth persists because genius was bad at the thing he became famous for is a dramatically more inspiring and marketable story than the mundane truth, which is genius was always brilliant at his specialty, but couldn't conjugate French verbs. A statement that is relatable but makes for a terrible motivational poster. 18. Carrots do not give you night vision or significantly improve your eyesight in any clinically meaningful way, and the origin of this myth is actually one of the most brilliantly executed pieces of military propaganda in history. During World War II, the British Royal Air Force developed a revolutionary secret radar system that allowed their fighter pilots to detect and shoot down enemy bombers with unprecedented accuracy during nighttime raids. Rather than reveal the existence of this classified technology, British intelligence launched a propaganda campaign attributing their pilots' remarkable success to a carrot-heavy diet, complete with public advertisements encouraging citizens to eat more carrots to improve their own vision during wartime blackouts. The lie was so convincingly presented and widely disseminated that it persisted for decades after the war ended, and the radar technology was fully declassified. People just kept believing it because it sounded scientific enough to be true, and nobody had a compelling reason to question whether vegetables could grant superhuman abilities. Carrots do contain beta-carotene, which converts to vitamin A in the body, and vitamin A is genuinely important for maintaining normal eye health, but eating carrots won't improve your vision beyond its normal baseline capacity. You cannot eat your way to night vision no matter how many carrots you consume, but the British military essentially pranked the entire world into eating more vegetables using fake nutritional science, which might honestly be the most wholesome and beneficial piece of wartime deception ever created. 19. There is no alpha wolf in the wild, and the entire concept of alpha males in wolf packs, dominant leaders who achieve their position through aggression, intimidation, and physical dominance, is based on fundamentally flawed research that the original scientist has spent decades trying to correct without success. The alpha wolf concept came from a study of wolves in captivity conducted in the 1940s, where unrelated wolves were placed together in an artificial environment and predictably established dominance hierarchies through conflict. Similar to what happens when you put random strangers in any confined space with limited resources. The scientist who conducted that study, L. David Mech, later spent years studying wolves in the wild and discovered that natural wolf packs function completely differently. Their family units led by breeding parents, operating more like a household with a mom and dad guiding their offspring than a corporation with a chest-thumping CEO ruling through fear. Mech has actively and publicly campaigned against his own earlier findings for decades, writing papers, giving interviews, and even asking his publisher to stop printing his original book because its conclusions were wrong. Despite the actual wolf scientist spending half his career begging people to stop believing his early work, the alpha wolf concept escaped into popular culture and became the foundation of an entire self-help industry, featuring men calling themselves alpha males, based on wolf science that the wolf scientist himself says is completely wrong. 20. You don't actually need to drink 8 glasses of water a day, and this recommendation has no clear, verified scientific origin, despite being treated as medical gospel by hydration enthusiasts, water bottle companies, and wellness influencers worldwide. The nearest traceable source appears to be a 1945 report from the U.S. Food and Nutrition Board that suggested humans need approximately 2.5 liters of water daily. But the critical second sentence of that recommendation, which explicitly noted that most of this quantity is contained in prepared foods, was conveniently and permanently stripped from every subsequent repetition of the guideline. Your body is remarkably sophisticated at communicating when it needs water. The mechanism is called thirst. It's been refined by millions of years of evolution, and it works extraordinarily well in healthy adults who eat regular meals and drink when their body signals them to. The 8-glass myth has spawned a massive reusable water bottle industry, created an entirely unnecessary category of anxiety about personal hydration levels, inspired apps that send you notifications reminding you to drink water as if your body's own thirst mechanism has somehow become obsolete, and produced millions of people who carry water bottles everywhere like emotional support accessories, constantly sipping liquid they don't need because a misquoted, incomplete 80-year-old government report told them to. 21. Chameleons don't change color to camouflage themselves against their surroundings. This is one of those facts that absolutely everyone knows, that sounds completely logical, and that almost nobody has ever bothered to verify because it seems so obviously true. Chameleons are the animals famous for changing color, and the only logical reason an animal would change color is to hide from predators by blending into its environment, right? Wrong on virtually every count. Chameleons primarily change color to communicate with other chameleons, expressing dominance, submission, aggression, fear, or willingness to mate through color displays that function more like emotional semaphore than camouflage. They also change color to regulate body temperature, turning darker to absorb more sunlight and lighter to reflect it. A stressed chameleon turns dark, an angry chameleon turns bright. A chameleon trying to attract a mate puts on an elaborate color show that has absolutely nothing to do with hiding, and everything to do with being as visible and impressive as possible. Some chameleon species do have limited ability to match certain backgrounds, but the idea that they're masters of disguise who can seamlessly blend into any surface like a living, breathing green screen is a myth that nature documentaries have perpetuated for decades, because lizard changes color to express romantic interest doesn't get as many viewers as lizard becomes invisible. 22. The tongue map, that familiar diagram showing specific, dedicated areas of the tongue responsible for sweet, salty, sour, and bitter tastes, is something almost every person on Earth learned in elementary school science class, and almost nothing about it is true. The diagram typically shows sweetness detected at the tip, saltiness on the sides near the front, sourness on the sides near the back, and bitterness at the very back, creating a neat geographical division of taste labor that is satisfying to learn, easy to draw, and almost entirely fictional. Every part of your tongue can detect every type of basic taste. The myth was based on a misinterpretation of a German research paper from the early 1900s, by a Harvard psychologist who took data showing very slight regional variations in taste sensitivity and turned it into a rigid map of exclusive taste zones. The original German data showed that certain areas of the tongue are marginally, not exclusively, more sensitive to certain tastes, a subtle finding that was wildly exaggerated into the colorful classroom diagram that became a staple of science education worldwide. The tongue map has been debunked for decades but survives because it's easy to teach, fun to test with sugar and lemon juice, and because correcting it requires teachers to admit they've been teaching something wrong for their entire career, which is a conversation nobody wants to have. 23. Ostriches do not bury their heads in the sand when they're scared. This image has become such a universal symbol of willful denial and avoidance that burying your head in the sand is a common expression in virtually every language and culture on Earth, all based on a behavior that no ostrich has ever actually performed. When ostriches sense danger, they have two primary responses. They either run, at speeds up to 45 miles per hour, which is significantly faster than most horses and faster than any human has ever moved, or they flatten their bodies against the ground with their long necks stretched out horizontally to minimize their visual profile against the landscape. From a distance, particularly the kind of distance ancient Roman naturalists were observing from, an ostrich lying flat with its relatively small head pressed against the ground can create the optical illusion of having buried its head in the sand, especially across the shimmering heat of an African savanna. The myth was first recorded by the Roman scholar Pliny the Elder over 2,000 years ago, and has survived the entire duration of Western civilization, despite ostriches demonstrating their actual defensive strategy every single day. Which isn't hiding, it's violently kicking threats with legs powerful enough to disembowel a lion and kill a human with a single blow. If anything, ostriches should be the universal symbol for "don't mess with me," not "I'm pretending the problem doesn't exist." 24. Sugar does not make children hyperactive. This is the single hill that every parent on Earth will die on, and every parent on Earth is scientifically, measurably, and repeatedly proven wrong. Multiple rigorous double-blind studies, the gold standard of scientific research, have consistently demonstrated that children who consume sugar behave identically to children given sugar-free placebo alternatives, with zero detectable difference in activity levels, attention spans, or behavior. The difference exists entirely and exclusively in parents' perception. In a particularly revealing study, parents who were told their children had been given a large amount of sugar rated their children's behavior as significantly more hyperactive than parents who were told their children received a placebo, even when both groups of children had actually received the exact same sugar-free drink. The myth persists because children's birthday parties, Halloween nights, and holiday gatherings, environments where sugar consumption is highest, are also environments saturated with excitement, social stimulation, novel experiences, loud music, other excited children, and the kind of overstimulation that would make any child energetic and unfocused, whether they consumed sugar or ate nothing but plain vegetables. Sugar is being systematically blamed for what is actually the completely natural and expected behavior of excited children in exciting environments. And the sugar industry has been trying to correct this misconception for years, while everyone categorically ignores them because the lie feels so undeniably, experientially true. 25. Toilet water does not spin in opposite directions depending on which hemisphere you're in. The Coriolis effect, the rotational force caused by the Earth's spin that genuinely influences the direction of large-scale weather systems like hurricanes and cyclones, is a real physical phenomenon, but it's far too weak to have any measurable effect on something as small and fast-moving as the water in a toilet bowl, a sink drain, or a bathtub. The direction your toilet flushes is determined entirely by the shape of the bowl, the angle and force of the water jets, and the design of the plumbing, not by your geographical coordinates on the planet. This myth was spectacularly popularized by a famous television episode that demonstrated the effect using rigged sinks designed to drain in specific directions, presenting a predetermined result as a spontaneous, natural phenomenon to millions of viewers who had no reason to question it. Since then, it's been repeated by tourists crossing the equator, geography teachers who should know better, and countless travel shows featuring hosts flushing toilets in different countries with manufactured amazement. If the Coriolis effect were actually strong enough to determine the rotation of water in your toilet bowl, It would also be strong enough to make walking in a straight line noticeably difficult, which should instantly debunk the myth for anyone willing to think about it for more than 5 seconds. But apparently, thinking about it for 5 seconds is too much to ask. 26. Hair and fingernails do not continue growing after death. This creepy fact has been a staple of horror stories, Halloween conversations, and morbid dinner party discussions for centuries. And it has never been true for a single moment in the entire history of human mortality. What actually happens is that after death, the body dehydrates and the skin retracts, shrinking and pulling back from the hair follicles and nail beds, making the hair and nails appear longer, relative to the surrounding tissue that's gradually drying out and receding. Nothing is growing. Everything is shrinking, creating an optical illusion that caused ancient people to believe the dead were somehow still biologically active in a limited hair and nail growing capacity. Cell division, which is required for actual growth, ceases completely when the body dies because cells need glucose and oxygen to divide, and dead bodies supply neither. The myth persists because it's genuinely creepy, provides excellent material for horror fiction and campfire stories, and because nobody wants to be the person at a party who kills the mood by launching into a detailed explanation of post-mortem tissue dehydration mechanics when someone brings up a fun, spooky fact. 27. Bats are not blind. The phrase blind as a bat has been used for so long and so universally that most people genuinely, sincerely believe that bats navigate the world in total pitch darkness, using only echolocation, like furry little submarines pinging their way through the night sky with zero visual capability. In reality, every single bat species on Earth has functioning eyes, and many species have vision that's actually quite good. Some large fruit bats have excellent low-light vision that outperforms human eyesight in dark conditions, seeing perfectly well in moonlight that would leave humans stumbling into trees. Bats use echolocation as a supplementary navigation tool that enhances their ability to hunt fast-moving insects in darkness, not as a replacement for eyes that they don't have. It's an additional sense layered on top of normal vision, not a compensation for lacking it. Calling bats blind because they also use sonar is like calling dolphins deaf because they also use their eyes. It confuses having an extra remarkable ability with lacking a basic one. Bats can see you perfectly well, which, depending on your feelings about bats, should honestly make them either more fascinating or more terrifying, but definitely not blind. 28. Almost everyone believes that medieval people thought the Earth was flat, imagining an entire civilization of terrified sailors convinced they'd sail right off the edge of the world into the mouths of sea monsters if they went too far. This is a myth about a myth, a made-up lie about historical ignorance that was itself created out of historical ignorance. Educated people in medieval Europe absolutely, unambiguously knew the Earth was round. This had been mathematically demonstrated by ancient Greek scholars like Eratosthenes over 1,000 years before the medieval period, and their work was well known, widely taught, and accepted throughout medieval European academia and the Catholic Church, which explicitly acknowledged a spherical Earth in numerous scholarly and theological texts. The flat Earth myth about medieval people was primarily popularized in the 19th century by writers like Washington Irving, who included a fictional scene in his biography of Christopher Columbus, depicting the explorer arguing with ignorant church officials who believed the Earth was flat. A scene that was entirely invented, but became so widely believed that it permanently rewrote public perception of an entire historical era. The idea that a civilization believed they'd fall off the edge of the world makes for a wonderfully dramatic story about human stupidity, which is precisely why it was fabricated by people who wanted to portray the Middle Ages as an era of laughable ignorance, in contrast to their own enlightened modernity. 29. Dropping a penny from the top of the Empire State Building will not kill someone on the sidewalk below. This myth has made tourists nervous, physics professors irritated, and building security guards tired of answering the same question for decades. A penny weighs approximately 1 gram and has a flat, non-aerodynamic shape that creates significant air resistance as it falls, meaning its terminal velocity. The maximum speed it can reach while falling through air is only about 30 to 50 miles per hour depending on its orientation during the fall. At that speed, a penny striking you would feel roughly equivalent to being flicked firmly in the forehead. startling and mildly painful, but absolutely nowhere near enough force to cause serious injury, let alone death. For comparison, a bullet exits a firearm at speeds exceeding 1,700 miles per hour. The penny myth persists because the Empire State Building is impressively tall. Pennies are small and hard, and the combination of great height plus solid object intuitively feels like it should equal lethal consequences to anyone who hasn't studied terminal velocity. But physics doesn't care about intuition, and air resistance is the unsung hero protecting pedestrians from the theoretical penny attacks they were never actually in danger from. 30. The widespread fear of MSG, monosodium glutamate, has been driving people away from Chinese restaurants and influencing food labeling for over 50 years based on a 1968 letter published in the New England Journal of Medicine that described symptoms like numbness and headache after eating Chinese food. That single letter, which was anecdotal and not a peer-reviewed study, spawned the term Chinese restaurant syndrome and launched decades of panic about a seasoning that had been used safely in cooking for thousands of years across multiple Asian cultures. Subsequent decades of rigorous scientific research involving thousands of participants have found no consistent evidence that MSG causes headaches, numbness, flushing, or any of the symptoms historically attributed to it in amounts typically used in cooking. Here's the particularly revealing part. MSG is a naturally occurring amino acid found abundantly in tomatoes, Parmesan cheese, mushrooms, soy sauce, and dozens of other foods that Western cultures consume enthusiastically without any reported symptoms. The selective terror of MSG specifically in Chinese food, but not in Italian food, snack chips, or fast food burgers, all of which contain MSG or naturally occurring glutamates, reveals that the so-called health concern was always more entangled with cultural prejudice and xenophobia than with actual food science. 31. Waking a sleepwalker is not dangerous and will not cause them to have a heart attack, a seizure, brain damage, permanent psychological trauma, or sudden death from shock. This myth has been so thoroughly believed for so long that countless people have stood paralyzed in their hallways, watching a loved one wander around the house doing potentially dangerous things, approaching stairs, reaching for kitchen knives, heading toward doors that lead outside, because they were genuinely convinced that waking them would somehow be worse than letting them continue navigating the physical world while completely unconscious. In reality, waking a sleepwalker might briefly confuse and disorient them, possibly startle them, and almost certainly result in an awkward moment where neither person knows what to say. But it is infinitely, incomparably less dangerous than allowing them to continue sleepwalking into situations where real physical harm is possible. Sleep medicine specialists recommend gently guiding sleepwalkers back to bed if possible. But if that fails or if the sleepwalker is in danger, waking them is completely safe and unquestionably preferable to watching someone navigate a staircase, a kitchen full of sharp objects, or the outside world while their conscious brain is completely offline. 32. The commonly taught fact that humans have exactly 5 senses, sight, hearing, touch, taste, and smell, is a dramatic and embarrassing undercount that has been presented as complete scientific truth in schools for centuries without correction or update. Humans actually possess significantly more than 5 senses, and the exact number depends on how precisely you define sense. But most neuroscientists count between 9 and 21 distinct sensory systems. These include proprioception, the sense that tells you where your limbs and body parts are positioned without having to look at them; thermoception, which detects changes in temperature; nociception, the system that processes and registers pain; equilibrioception, which maintains balance and spatial orientation; chronoception, the perception of the passage of time; and interoception, the awareness of internal body states like hunger, thirst, and the need to use a bathroom. The 5-sense model originates with Aristotle, who was genuinely brilliant, but also lived approximately 2,400 years ago and worked without the benefit of brain imaging technology, neurological research tools, or basically any modern scientific equipment. Teaching children they have 5 senses in the 21st century is roughly equivalent to teaching them the periodic table has 4 elements. It was an impressive starting point for its era, but it's been dramatically outdated for so long that continuing to teach it without qualification borders on educational malpractice. 33. Someone at some point started the persistent myth that you involuntarily eat a certain number of insects per year while sleeping. The specific count varies wildly depending on who's telling the story, ranging from 2 to 12 to dozens. But regardless of the claimed number, the consistent underlying assertion that bugs regularly crawl into your mouth while you sleep and you swallow them without waking up is not supported by any scientific evidence whatsoever. Like the spider myth, this claim exists without a credible source study, without supporting data, and without any biological mechanism that would explain why insects would voluntarily enter the mouth of a large, warm, breathing, vibrating predator. Insects, like spiders, are evolutionarily programmed to avoid large living things that produce heat, vibrations, carbon dioxide, and movement, all of which sleeping humans do constantly. There is no food in your mouth that would attract insects, no pheromone signal inviting them in, and no logical reason why any bug would explore the most dangerous possible location on the most dangerous possible creature in their environment. The myth survives because it's disgusting enough to be instantly memorable, physically impossible to personally disprove without elaborate sleeping surveillance, and satisfies the human brain's deep love of horrifying facts that make you shudder every time you think about them. 34. The widely promoted idea that people have distinct learning styles, visual, auditory, or kinesthetic, and that education must be tailored to match each student's individual style to be effective, has been treated as unquestionable educational gospel for decades, despite having virtually no credible scientific support. The theory sounds intuitively correct and feels personally validating. Almost everyone enjoys identifying themselves as a visual learner or an auditory learner because it provides a neat explanation for academic struggles and a personalized framework for self-understanding. The problem is that study after study, review after review, and meta-analysis after meta-analysis has consistently failed to demonstrate that matching instructional methods to a student's preferred learning style actually improves educational outcomes in any measurable way. People certainly have preferences for how they receive information. Some enjoy watching videos, others prefer reading text, and some like hands-on activities. But there's a crucial difference between preference and effectiveness that the learning styles industry has systematically blurred. Preferring to learn through videos doesn't mean you actually learn better from videos any more than preferring pizza means pizza is the most nutritious food available. The learning styles myth has influenced curriculum design, teacher training programs, educational policy, and school budgets worldwide, redirecting enormous resources toward an idea that sounds wonderful, feels personally meaningful, and has failed every rigorous scientific test ever applied to it. 35. Someone's middle school teacher probably told them with complete confidence that the Great Wall of China is the only man-made structure visible from the moon, which takes the already debunked visible from space myth and inflates it to even more absurd proportions. From the surface of the moon, which is approximately 238,900 miles away from Earth, absolutely no individual man-made structure is visible. In fact, from the moon you can barely distinguish continents from oceans, and the entire concept of human construction is completely invisible against the scale of the planet. The Great Wall, despite its impressive length, is only about 15 to 30 feet wide, and suggesting it can be seen with the naked eye from nearly 250,000 miles away is equivalent to claiming you could see a single strand of spaghetti lying on a football field from an airplane cruising at 35,000 feet. The math simply doesn't work regardless of how impressive the structure is. Multiple Apollo astronauts have confirmed that from the lunar surface, Earth appears as a beautiful, luminous blue marble with visible cloud patterns and landmasses, but absolutely zero evidence of human civilization, construction, or activity of any kind. The myth endures because it makes the Great Wall sound even more spectacular than it already is, and correcting it feels like diminishing one of humanity's genuine achievements. But the truth is that the Great Wall is incredible enough on its own merits without needing a fake space visibility claim to make it more impressive. 36. The exaggerated terror of double dipping a chip, taking a bite, then dipping the same chip back into a shared bowl, has been elevated from a minor social faux pas to an apparent public health crisis, largely thanks to a single memorable scene from a 1990s sitcom that turned the act into cultural taboo. While laboratory studies have confirmed that double dipping does transfer some bacteria from the dipper's mouth to the communal dip, The actual quantity transferred is extraordinarily small, so small that you'd need to double dip aggressively and repeatedly to create bacterial levels that approach anything resembling a genuine health concern. For context, you transfer significantly more bacteria by shaking someone's hand, touching a shared doorknob, using a public handrail, or borrowing someone's phone than by double dipping a single chip at a party. The double dipping panic is a classic example of a real but trivially small risk being amplified by cultural repetition until it feels much more dangerous than it actually is. Is double dipping slightly unsanitary? Technically, yes. Is it the biohazard level event that party guests treat it as? Absolutely not. But the social taboo has become so powerful that double dipping at a gathering is now treated with roughly the same moral seriousness as a minor crime, all because of a sitcom joke that permanently rewired society's relationship with communal salsa. 37. Someone at some point told you that coffee stunts your growth, and if you started drinking coffee as a teenager and ended up shorter than you hoped, you may have spent years blaming your morning caffeine habit instead of the actual culprit, which was always and only your genetic code. There is no scientific evidence, none, zero, across multiple decades of nutritional research, linking coffee consumption to reduced height in children, teenagers, or adults. The myth appears to have originated from early observational studies that found a correlation between caffeine consumption and slightly reduced bone density in elderly women, a finding that was later explained by the fact that heavy coffee drinkers in the study were also consuming significantly less milk, meaning the issue was reduced calcium intake, not caffeine-induced skeletal shrinking. Coffee has many real documented effects on the human body. It genuinely increases alertness, can elevate heart rate, may temporarily raise blood pressure, and definitely impact sleep quality. But making you shorter is definitively not among them. The myth has primarily and perhaps exclusively served as a convenient tool for parents who didn't want their teenagers drinking coffee and needed a threat more persuasive and concrete than "you'll be jittery and annoying," which, while accurate, lacks the terrifying permanence of "you'll be short forever." 38. Almost everyone's fundamental understanding of human body temperature is based on the long-standing but incorrect claim that 98.6 degrees Fahrenheit, 37 degrees Celsius, is the universal normal human body temperature, a single precise number that your thermometer should read if you're healthy, and that any deviation from signals potential illness. This extremely specific figure originates from a German study conducted in 1851 by a physician named Karl Reinhold August Wunderlich, who took approximately 1 million temperature measurements from 25,000 patients using mercury thermometers that were significantly less accurate than the digital ones you can buy today for $8 at any pharmacy. Modern research using better equipment and larger, more diverse populations has consistently found that average human body temperature is actually closer to 97.5 degrees Fahrenheit to 97.9 degrees Fahrenheit. And more importantly, that normal temperature varies enormously based on time of day, age, physical activity, menstrual cycle, individual metabolic rate, and dozens of other factors that make a single universal number fundamentally meaningless. The 98.6 myth has caused millions of people to either panic unnecessarily about fevers that were actually well within normal individual variation, or conversely to dismiss genuine fevers because they were still close to the supposedly normal 98.6 benchmark. Your normal might be 97.4. Your coworker's normal might be 98.8. Neither of you is broken, and the German doctor from 1851, while doing his best with the tools available, gave the world a number that's been less useful as a medical guideline and more useful as proof that a single outdated data point can mislead billions of people for nearly 2 centuries. 39. Someone definitely told you at some point during your childhood that touching a toad would give you warts, and if you grew up anywhere near a garden, a pond, or a damp backyard, this myth probably kept you from picking up perfectly harmless amphibians for your entire formative years. Warts are caused exclusively by the human papillomavirus, HPV, a human-specific virus that lives on human skin and is transmitted through human-to-human contact, usually through small breaks or abrasions in the skin. Toads are completely, biologically, genetically, and categorically uninvolved in the process at every level. The bumps on a toad's skin that look so convincingly like warts are actually parotoid glands and other granular glands that produce mild defensive toxins designed to make the toad taste bad to predators. They're defense mechanisms, not contagious disease vectors. Toads can't give you warts any more than you can give a toad the common cold. The viruses involved are species-specific and cannot cross between amphibians and mammals. The myth persists entirely because toad skin looks warty to the human eye, and the human brain has never met a visual similarity it wouldn't immediately promote to a causal relationship, regardless of whether any actual biological connection exists between the two things that look alike. 40. The frequently repeated medical advice that you must always complete a full prescribed course of antibiotics, even after you feel completely better, is a piece of guidance that is increasingly being questioned and in some cases directly contradicted by the scientific and medical community. For decades, doctors, pharmacists, and public health campaigns have unanimously warned that stopping antibiotics early creates antibiotic-resistant bacteria, superbugs, by killing off the weak bacteria and leaving the strong ones alive to reproduce and spread. However, a growing body of recent research suggests that for many common infections, this concern may be backwards. Taking antibiotics for longer than necessary can actually increase the development of resistance by exposing bacteria to the drug for extended periods, giving them more opportunity to develop survival mechanisms. Multiple infectious disease specialists and public health researchers have now published papers arguing that the always finish the course rule was established more from medical tradition and reasonable-sounding logic than from rigorous clinical evidence, and that for many infections, shorter antibiotic courses are just as effective and potentially safer than the standard longer prescriptions. This absolutely doesn't mean you should freelance your own antibiotic schedule without consulting a doctor. But it does mean that one of the most universally and confidently repeated pieces of medical advice on Earth may be significantly more complicated, nuanced, and possibly wrong than the simple absolute rule everyone believes it to be. 41. The persistent belief that eating cheese before bed gives you nightmares has been repeated as folk wisdom for centuries across multiple cultures without any consistent, peer-reviewed scientific evidence supporting the connection. The most commonly cited study on this topic was a small 2005 investigation conducted by the British Cheese Board. Yes, the organization whose literal purpose is promoting cheese sales, which claimed that different cheese varieties affected dream content in different ways, with some producing pleasant dreams and others producing vivid or bizarre ones. The study was tiny, not published in any peer-reviewed scientific journal, used self-reported dream data from a statistically insignificant sample, and was transparently funded by an organization with an obvious financial interest in getting people to think and talk about cheese as much as possible. Nightmares are caused by stress, anxiety, certain medications, sleep disorders, alcohol consumption, disrupted sleep schedules, and a variety of psychological factors. Not by dairy products consumed before bedtime. Eating a heavy meal of any kind before sleep can cause digestive discomfort that fragments sleep and potentially increases dream vividness or recall. But this effect is not specific to cheese and has nothing to do with cheddar's alleged nightmare-inducing properties. The cheese nightmare myth is folk wisdom that has somehow survived centuries of progress in sleep science without ever being validated by any of it. 42. Everyone confidently states that diamonds are the hardest substance on Earth. And while that claim was technically accurate for most of recorded human history, it hasn't been strictly true for years and is becoming less true all the time as materials science advances. Researchers have identified and in some cases synthesized multiple materials that outperform diamond in various measures of hardness, including wurtzite boron nitride, lonsdaleite, a hexagonal form of carbon created by meteorite impacts, and various ultra-hard fullerite compounds. Even naturally occurring substances have been demonstrated to scratch diamond under specific conditions, challenging the hardest substance claim at its most fundamental level. The diamonds are unbreakable myth persists primarily because the diamond industry has absolutely zero financial incentive to correct it. Science textbooks are updated at roughly the speed of continental drift, and diamonds are one of the hardest commonly encountered materials, but not technically the absolute hardest substance known to modern science, doesn't exactly have the poetic ring that fits on a Valentine's Day advertisement. It's worth noting that diamonds are absolutely still incredibly hard. They just don't hold the undisputed championship belt that popular culture has permanently awarded them. 43. Someone's favorite action movie has been lying to them for decades by showing people being thrown violently backward through windows, across rooms, and over furniture by the impact of gunshots. A dramatic visual that is so universally depicted in cinema that most people genuinely believe bullets physically launch human bodies through the air upon impact. In reality, basic Newtonian physics makes this essentially impossible. A bullet is very small and very fast. It transfers enough kinetic energy to cause devastating internal tissue damage, but nowhere near enough momentum to physically move a human-sized object any appreciable distance. Newton's third law states that for every action there is an equal and opposite reaction, meaning if a bullet could throw a 180-pound person backwards 6 feet, the recoil would also throw the 180-pound shooter backwards 6 feet, and every movie shootout would feature both parties simultaneously flying in opposite directions like a physics demonstration gone wrong. Hollywood achieves those dramatic flying backward death scenes using wire rigs, hidden harnesses, and expert stunt choreography, creating a spectacle that looks cinematically thrilling, but represents physics that would make Isaac Newton spin in his grave, though presumably not fly backward out of it, because that's not how force works either. 44. The claim that you lose most of your body heat through your head, and therefore always need to wear a hat in cold weather, is based on a catastrophically poorly designed military study from the 1950s that has been misleading parents, cold weather hikers, and hat salespeople for over 7 decades. In the original study, subjects were dressed in insulated Arctic survival suits that covered their entire bodies except their heads, then exposed to cold temperatures while researchers measured heat loss. Unsurprisingly, the subjects lost a disproportionate amount of heat through the only body part that wasn't insulated, their heads. And someone interpreted this result as humans lose most of their body heat through their heads, rather than the blindingly obvious correct conclusion. Humans lose heat through whichever body part isn't adequately covered. If the study had been conducted with subjects wearing insulated suits that left their left arm exposed, we'd all be walking around obsessing about keeping our left arms warm and telling children they'll catch pneumonia from bare elbows. Your head represents roughly 10% of your body's total surface area, and when uninsulated, loses approximately 10% of your total body heat, which is perfectly proportional, not disproportional at all. You lose exactly as much heat per square inch through an uncovered arm, leg, or torso as through an uncovered head. But please put on your sleeves your losing body heat has never been as catchy or as culturally embedded as put on a hat. So the myth thrives while the truth continues to be ignored by concerned parents everywhere. 45. And finally, we end with what might be the most widely believed and least questioned lie of all: the comforting idea that common sense exists as a universal, baseline level of knowledge and judgment that most reasonable people inherently possess and can rely upon. In reality, what people call common sense is actually a wildly inconsistent collection of cultural assumptions, personal experiences, regional customs, generational biases, and inherited beliefs that vary enormously between individuals, communities, countries, and time periods. What qualifies as common sense in one culture is considered absurd in another. What's obvious to someone who grew up in one environment is completely invisible to someone from a different background. A fishing village's common sense about weather patterns would be useless in a desert, and a Wall Street trader's obvious financial principles would be meaningless to a subsistence farmer. Neither person lacks sense. They just have entirely different sets of it. People invoke the phrase common sense most frequently and most aggressively when they want to dismiss someone else's perspective, experience, or question without actually engaging with it intellectually, using the phrase as a rhetorical shortcut that essentially means, I believe this so strongly and have believed it for so long that I shouldn't have to explain or defend why. And the fact that you're asking means something is wrong with you, rather than with my unexamined belief. The notion that there exists a universal baseline of human knowledge and judgment that every reasonable person naturally shares is itself one of the biggest, most persistent, and most consequential lies that everyone believes. Because the person confidently declaring it's just common sense almost never pauses to consider that their sense might be far less common than they assume. That their obvious truths might be nothing more than comfortable, familiar lies they've absorbed from their specific environment and never once thought to question. Exactly like the 44 myths, misconceptions, and fabrications we just spent this entire video counting down. Here's the genuinely uncomfortable reality about why these lies survive. Humans don't believe false things because they're stupid. They believe false things because lies that feel true are almost always more compelling, more memorable, and more socially useful than truth that feel counterintuitive. A lie that everyone around you believes functions identically to a fact in your daily life, and questioning it doesn't feel like pursuing truth. It feels like being difficult, contrarian, or annoying. The myths on this list didn't survive for decades or centuries because evidence supported them. They survived because they were easy to repeat, satisfying to believe, and nobody wanted to be the person at the dinner table who ruined a perfectly good conversation by saying, "Actually, that's not true," and pulling out their phone to prove it. The real question isn't why we believed these particular 45 lies. It's how many more lies we're still believing right now, today, this minute, that simply haven't been debunked yet, or that we haven't encountered the correction for. Because if history, science, and this entire video are any guide, the answer is almost certainly a lot more than any of us would be comfortable admitting. Subscribe if you'd rather be uncomfortably correct than comfortably wrong. And share this with the person who still thinks they only use 10% of their brain. They're going to need it.